You ever thought, man, I should be a technology advisor? If so, this podcast is for you. This week, we're going to be talking to Zach Anderson from Evolve IP about the technology advisor landscape. What does it take to be an advisor in today's business climate? And then we'll also touch on TSDs, the technology solution distributor. What should their role be? We'll be discussing this and more on this episode of Cloud Sherpa.
He is the president of Vocal Point Consulting that he started in 2010, and he's got over 21 years in the technology space. He is a very busy guy. He's the chairman of the board of the Orlando Technology Group, a technology advisory board member for the Conductive Education Center of Orlando, also advisory board member for the National Customer Service Association, and is also the host of the Cloud Sherpa podcast on YouTube. Truly a channel champion. I am proud to welcome Mr. Derek Rausch. Sir?
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Thank you so much for coming on. Today, we are going to be talking about a lot. Generally speaking, we want to talk about the technology landscape, the trends that Derek and his company sees, and also how the technology advisors in general or trusted advisors are evolving. So that's kind of the main topic of today. But before we get into that, I want to just go over a little bit of backstory, give you a little bit of time to tell your story a little bit. So tell me, how did you get started in the channel in the first place?
Well, I started in technology around 2002, working for a company called Exponets that got purchased by Avaya. So I'm one of the rare breeds that came from like the hardware side. So a lot of people in this industry come from that network side of, all the MCI WorldCom stuff and AT&T and all the breakup of the bells. So a lot of guys in the industry are from that piece of it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I cut my teeth on the hardware side, started getting into designing some of the systems. I was, one of the early adopters of IP, where, we helped start selling and designing that IP office that Avaya put out, one of the first IP systems to the market. Mm-hmm. So worked in that industry for a little bit until, Avaya chewed us up and spit us out. Worked for a couple of different, Avaya resellers that would resell Avaya and other solutions. But I was never comfortable there. Got recruited by a gal over at Paytech one day. Huh. And she said, hey, come work for me. And I'm like, I don't want to sell T1s. I'm like, I want this big fat check. I don't care about these little measly, commissions that you guys are making. She's like, no, we have this whole division that sells Avaya and, they're getting into Cisco and stuff like that. I said, okay, I'll take a look at it. Ended up working for them for about 5 years. And it was good because I learned a lot about the network side of it. So, not only did I have to know the hardware, but I had to know the network as well. And it gave me a well-rounded, just education and knowledge to be able to take to the customers. But if you know anything about Paytech and the merger with US Select and what was there, McGraw, what else did we have? Well, then, of course, Windstream came along. Yep. So we just had tons of M&A activity. And every time, you go through M&A, your job title changes, your role changes, your quota changes, all that stuff. And in 2010, I just said to my wife, I'm like, I really feel like I can do something better on my own. Mm-hmm. And I actually went out doing straight consulting, helping clients migrate from one PBX to another. Mm-hmm. And, it was probably, that was in 2010. It was probably about a year into it that I met a gal by the name of Carla Rorty over at Intelisys, and she introduced me to this whole recurring revenue model. And so I started selling, to some of my clients, things like MPLS, and you start looking at it and you go, dang, that $750 a month check is just going to keep coming in perpetuity. And then you start doing the math and go, wow, maybe there's something to this recurring revenue thing. Mm-hmm. So I guess it was probably maybe 3 more years into it that we started seeing the cloud develop. I remember being at an MSP show, actually here in Orlando, and there was all these companies that were popping up, and they called themselves cloud this and cloud that. And I'm thinking, man, these guys are nuts. We already tried this with Centrex and it didn't work. So I really thought it was a fad. But gosh, about a year after that, I'm looking at it and going, dang, this ain't going away. And you start seeing this development of the cloud. And it wasn't long after that where we completely rebranded, where we are 100% cloud focused today. We don't touch hardware at all. So that's really the story of how we got to where we're at today. And we continually work on that message as far as how we can serve our clients.
Mm-hmm. So how has the technology advisor or trusted advisor role, how has that changed from the time that you started till what it is today?
I remember early on when we started in this industry, when we got into the whole recurring revenue model, I would see these guys have these websites, and they would post these pictures with their client, $10,000, on a big fat check, because that's what they saved them over the next 3 years, or $100,000 or whatever. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool marketing. But the more you looked into it, they were just quote machines. They were pulling quotes and saying, here's, 3 or 4 quotes, pick one. And then they got paid on that, right? I didn't want to be that. I had seen, death by PowerPoint and all the spin selling models that we were taught at Avaya, and I just said, I want to be different. So, we got out of that pretty quick. We never really went there. We never wanted to say, hey, we're just agents. We'll go out there and source all these quotes for you, and then you can figure out which one is the best for you, Mr. Customer, and away we go. We wanted to flip the script. We wanted to say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And then we'll find you the right technology to solve it. So that's why we call ourselves Cloud Sherpas. We want to guide you through that process. We're not experts in the technology. We got people like you guys who are experts in the technology, right?
Right.
And we've got engineers at, Intelisys, Avant, Sandler, and all the other TSDs. Mm-hmm. So if I can tap into those guys for the expertise, all we have to do is guide our client through the process. Mm. And that's really where we've landed today.
Mm. And have you seen the role of the TSD change in the time that you've, since the time you started Vocal Point?
Yeah. I think early on, the TSDs were more involved in our business, way more early on. Nowadays, I rarely hear from any of the TSDs. Part of it is we don't need them as much, because we're a little bit more self-sufficient.
Sure.
But the other part of that is, I think some of their resources and their go-to-market strategy has changed too, where they're trying to provide more of, the engineering resources and, giving support to the agents on the back end, that maybe don't have some of the back of the house type things for, commissions and escalations and things of that nature. But really, probably the only time I really engage the TSDs is when I need that high level engineering support, or if we need some sort of escalation all the way to, level 3 or level 4 inside of a organization.
Interesting. I know that obviously there's a lot of, private equity, and there's, obviously, like you said, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions, throughout the entirety of, your channel tenure per se. But how do you think private equity has affected the trusted advisor community and the TSD community?
That's a tough one. I mean, we get approached all the time by private equity, and I honestly haven't looked into it. I might be old, but I'm not that old. I still feel like I got quite a bit of life in me. I don't know if I'll ever quit working per se, but I don't understand some of the numbers or some of the game that's played there. I get where, maybe some of these guys are getting a lump sum to walk away. It's hard to say like what control that they actually have in the process anymore, or how much say they have over their customer. Some of them, they say, oh yeah, you have full control over the customer. It's still your customer. We'll just give you a path to exit over the next, 10, 15 years. And I mean, I've worked the numbers before, and it's hard for me to fathom, because our average tenure for our client is about 7 or 8 years. Most of our clients are going to stick around a long time. So if you averaged out like what you're bringing in on a monthly basis versus selling out, the numbers just don't make sense to me unless they're offering, millions to walk away, and I don't think they are. But yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know how that's going to shake out with the whole private equity market. But it remains to be seen. I think it definitely gives a lot of us guys a path to walk away. But I'm not sure if it makes sense until you're probably really a good 4 or 5 years from retiring.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is interesting about private equity is that, a lot of the reason that, trusted advisor owners of these trusted advisor companies, the reason they get into this business is because they were in corporate America. They want to get out of that landscape of, like you said, hitting quotas and sort of being, subject to the rulings of, the higher ups, right?
Yep.
But then you've got private equity coming in, and you're right. Like how much say do they really have over that company? It's almost like you're going away from your original intention of getting away from having that hierarchy, and now you've got, and I see your point. Like, yes, there is an exit strategy, but it seems almost counterintuitive to the idea of why you got into the business in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, for me, I don't get it yet. I mean, they would have to really offer us a high number to be able to walk away.
But the good thing is it should give suppliers confidence that the channel is still a good, go-to-market strategy in general. And I
agree. So that's definitely right. It's a good flag. It says, hey, this is a viable, organization, and we see value in these companies going forward. So that is a good sign in terms of the entire market. The hard part is, there's not a lot of young guys getting into the business. So, all of us older guys that have been in the business 20 years or so, I mean, as we age out, I don't think there's enough younger people getting into this industry at the moment to help, fill that gap and support, the industry going forward. I'd love to see more younger people getting into the industry. But I think that's something that the TSDs probably have to be better at, as far as recruiting some of those younger guys, and being able to tell the story of what this industry can do. And I think even, telling the story of, hey, there's this whole path over here where you don't even need, the degree to be able to start out at middle management and hopefully work your way up. You can actually get some expertise or even some certifications and go to work and build a business and never have to, get into the rat race of the colleges these days.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think there aren't as many, folks in a younger generation coming up into the channel?
I just think it's getting the word out. And I think really honestly, even companies like mine, we have to do better at recruiting some guys that are younger. In fact, both the guys I have working for me are in their 30s, and I'd be ecstatic if they, wanted to fly the nest one day and build their own thing. That's fine. I'm good with that because I can always backfill that role.
Right.
But I think we have to be able to get the message out there and tell that story. And so it's up to us as well as the TSDs to do that.
Do you think that the market today, and by market, I mean like there are obviously more trusted advisor companies out there today than there were when you started. So do you think that there aren't as many new entries today into the market because it is a little bit more saturated? Or, what do you think the path is going to be the same coming in, building a whole new business today as a trusted advisor versus when you started?
It's difficult because, and most people will tell you, I know a lot of guys that still work for like the carriers and such. And I've said, man, you're so great at sales. You should get into this industry. But they realize the ramp up in this industry and the need to probably take a good 2 years. So you're talking about guys that are making maybe 150, 200 grand a year and coming down a notch to maybe making 0 to, 30, 40 grand that first year and, maybe even less. I think my first year in this business, I might've made like $12,000. It was rough, So, you've got to have some sort of support. Luckily, I had a wife that said, honey, I support you, do what you need to do. And it took us a couple of years to build the business, but, a lot of guys can't do that. I had one buddy that, he's like, man, I got a big house on the beach. I've got 6 kids. I got too big of a nut. I can't walk away from the money I'm making in order to start this business. And I think that's really the hard part. So I think TSDs really should start trying to figure out how to be more of an incubator. How do they, provide the resources and the knowledge to build a business? What are all the things you're going to need as far as putting an LLC together and finding a CPA and, all the little things that, you go, wow, I'm a great salesperson. I'll go out and start selling on my own. But you don't realize all the back end business stuff that you have to do on the everyday, to be successful. And that's the difficult part. And I think the TSDs should start getting into more of that incubation of the new businesses.
Do you think there's any areas in the U.S. or North America where there's still untapped organizations that could use the services of a trusted advisor? The reason I ask is because, if we do want to culminate the next generation trusted advisor, I think there's got to be, sort of gaps that could be filled. So do you think there are still those gaps?
I think there's a gap overall. I don't think it's regional. I think some of your larger cities, Chicago, New York, some of the businesses that, put their roots in some of these big cities, they probably understand, consultants. But most of them, when they think of consultants or advisors, they're thinking of like an Accenture or a KPMG that's, going to stick somebody in my organization, for, a year or two to help me develop this technology, roadmap, and I'm going to pay them $200,000 a year. And then at the end of it, I might get, some information that will help me. That's not what we do. Most of us, I should say. I think the majority of technology advisors today do charge for their time on the front end, because we started to realize our time is valuable, even though we're making these recurring revenue streams on the back end. But I think there's still a huge gap in the industry as far as letting businesses know that we even exist. We've seen this in the Technology Advisor Alliance, where we've had these discussions of, how do we get the word out there to businesses? Because most of them, when you start telling your story, they're like, wow, I didn't even know you guys existed. I didn't know I could come to an independent advisor that would walk me through this whole procurement process and look over my contracts and then help me with project management and implementation. I had no idea, because IT guys, CTOs, CIOs, they're so buried on the everyday mundane task of break fix that they can't even, do the research and find people like us.
Right.
I just talked to a guy up in Cleveland, and he's got, 35 locations, and he comes in every day. He's a CTO. He comes into work every day, and the first thing he does is answer 300 emails of, password resets and, all this other stuff. And here's a guy that's got, almost 600 employees and only 3 people. He's got himself and 2 other, IT admins that are handling all the IT throughout the company. Mm-hmm. He's like, Derek, I need to exit at some point. I'm going to retire soon. So how do I figure out how to move and migrate all this stuff to the cloud and put some management around it where I can walk away comfortably knowing that they're going to be able to handle it. Mm-hmm. And so that's some of the stuff that we can do, but getting our story out there is half the battle, because so many companies just don't even know that we exist at the moment.
How has, okay, so have you ever run into situations where an organization has used a technology advisor, but they had like a bad experience, for example? And then if so, like, how have you overcome that?
I actually haven't. The closest to that I can think of is I remember I had a client. It was actually an MSP that brought us into a organization, and the company had no IT. They had locations in Florida and New York, and they were, trying to, clean up their telecom. And the MSP, I think, didn't understand enough of our story. So shame on us to a point, right? But they didn't understand how to tell our story enough. And I had hit the MSP up, and I said, hey, whatever happened to that opportunity that you were working on? And they said, oh, they went a different direction. But I said, well, let me just give them a call. And I called the lady up, who was one of the owners of the company. And she's like, no, I still need you. She understood what we did, but the MSP didn't. And so we had to go back in and try to clean up all their telecom, which we did. Found a couple grand a month in savings, over the, several years, prior. But that's part of the battle is, even the companies that we work with that might recommend us is telling that story. So again, it goes back to, how do we tell the story of what we do? But yeah, I haven't run into a true advisor that was in there, that a company had a bad experience with. That hasn't happened to us.
That's great. That's good.
It's good, but it's also bad because it means there's not enough of us out there.
That's true. And that kind of brings us back to our last point of, there's still room Which, yeah, ultimately it's good and bad, good for the future, but, so do you feel like, just like the example of the company that you just said, how their IT staff, their CTO is overburdened, do you find that to be the case with a particular company size, like mid-level, small business, or like, do you ever find that with enterprise type businesses?
What we've found is if we're dealing with companies that have less than 100 employees or maybe less than about 10 million in revenue, then typically they don't have much of an IT staff, if any. Some of them are just using like an MSP to manage some services, and then the company owner or the finance guy that knows a little bit about IT is helping out with some of the break fix stuff. I don't really like getting into some of the smaller companies, because when we do get into them, they start looking at us like the IT staff, and we're not. I'm not going to mess with your DNS on your routers or anything like that. So we try to stay like above that 100 user range, up to about maybe 5,000 users. You start getting above that, and yeah, we'll certainly hunt squirrels and feast on elephants, so to speak. This old slogan one of my old bosses used to say. But when you get above that 5,000 mark, and into the $1 billion corporations and such, the red tape is, so much. Like when you start dealing with, say, hospitals, and you've got, 5 different CEOs and 20 different CFOs, and you have no idea who's really making the decisions, and it's just very convoluted. The process is very convoluted, and it's just such a long sales cycle. So we typically stay around maybe 200 users to about 2,000 is really kind of that sweet spot that we stay in.
Okay. Have you noticed that, like maybe in the past few years, especially with COVID and stuff, that IT budgets are less than what they were before COVID, or just before the last couple of years, or what do you think?
I think IT budgets have certainly shrunk, because companies think that they can do more with less, and in some cases they can. Maybe migrating some of that to cloud solutions is a better way to go. Cybersecurity is a good example. Every company wants to be secure, but yet they don't want to pay $150,000 a year for somebody to come on staff and handle cybersecurity for them. Well, for that matter, we can probably outsource it for less than $100 a year, the same solution, and get them more for less. So I think companies definitely realize there's some cost savings in cloud. So I think budgets have certainly shrunk a little bit. It's just allocating resources from one area to another is all it is at the end of the day. Because most of these companies are, like I said, the one large client that we're dealing with right now that has 3 guys handling, 600 users. You're not a CTO at that point. There's no strategy involved. You're just handling break fix.
Why do you think security has been so popular, in the channel circle for the last couple of years?
Well, because every conversation, whether it's, you're going in there talking about unified communications, or if you're talking about migrating data to the cloud, or if you're talking about, having a business continuity and disaster recovery, solution in place, every single thing, there's a security component attached to it. Security's got to be part of the conversation in everything. And so I think as, these conversations have evolved, over time, more and more companies realize that. And so they're popping up with different security solutions or different ways to secure environments. And, it's our job to try to figure out, well, number one, what is your risk tolerance? And then number two, how do we put the tools in place that make sense? Because some clients, with multiple locations, maybe they want, a quarantine strategy where they'll allow things to come in, but we quarantine it right away. For example, like in the way Exidium might work, where I'll let it come in, but then, that hacker is going to think he's in the system, but he's really in a sandbox.
Right.
And then they can handle it from there. Whereas other companies want, I'd rather have that email go off to a SOC, and that SOC will look it over, make sure it's clean, and then send it back to me, and put eyeballs on it. So it just depends on the approach that the clients want to take. And then, it's always up to us as well to try to figure out, what's your RPO and RTO, your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective. Are you, risk adverse? I've got one company right now that's got a 2-minute RPO, and they're paying way too much for it. They don't need a 2-minute RPO. They were oversold.
Right.
But it's understanding those things. And then the other thing to understand for us is compliance, PCI, HIPAA, SOX. If we don't have some sort of understanding about the compliance that's involved, then we're never going to have a seat at the table. But I told somebody in one of the webinars that we were on just the other day, they were talking about cybersecurity. And I said, well, don't try to be an expert in cybersecurity because you'll lose every time. What you need to do is be an expert in the procurement process and understanding the companies that are out there. And so that's really, again, it goes back to the messaging of us and then where we've landed. But cybersecurity definitely has to be a part of every single conversation right now. And it's really because of the way the market's driven, because we went from all these ransomware attacks to, starting to get into AI and deep fakes, where the phishing has gotten really sophisticated, where emails look very real. But now we're getting into, not just images that are created with AI, but now they only need like 3 seconds of your voice to create a deep fake of your voice. And then, you could get a, call in the middle of the night. Hey, Daddy, I'm in a Mexican prison. The federales want $5,000 to release me. Will you please send the money? And you think it's real. So that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with now with AI. And then I think quantum computing is just a whole nother ball game that's going to just totally break, any encryption that we have today. So it's a wild west right at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely want to get into, I want to ask you about some of your big predictions for like what's next beyond maybe AI or security or what have you. But I wanted to touch on something that you made me think of. You mentioned like advisors don't have to be experts. So do you feel like partners or trusted advisors get into situations or miss opportunities because they feel like they have to be an expert on what they're selling?
Absolutely. I think we've been guilty of it in the past too. Don't get me wrong. It's been a learning process throughout the years of understanding where we play well. But when you start realizing all the resources that are out there through the TSDs and even companies like yours at Evolve, you guys have some very good engineers on staff. And if we had a conversation with our client, your engineers, and they realize it's just not a great fit for y'all, I think you guys would be the first to say, hey, we'll help you out, by having this front end conversation, but we just don't see this as a good fit. And I think you would agree that you'd be willing to lose quickly in that deal so that you're not wasting a lot of time. But there's so many resources for us out there today. And I think this also goes to the fact that as a advisor in the industry, we don't have to be everything. I've got a company that I'm working with, another agent in this industry who's another advisor, and they can do everything that we do. But one of the things that they do really well is the front end auditing. So they'll come in and do a free audit and share in the cost savings with our client. And then that helps offset the costs that we're charging on the front end. Now we get to be able to come in and write up a scope of work and a roadmap for their IT department, and put together a full IT strategy and start implementing those solutions. And we did that without any out of pocket for the client. That's a win-win for us.
Yeah.
We've got other guys that are really good at, Microsoft that I can tap into. But I think it's just getting that knowledge of the resources that are out there so that we don't have to be everything to everybody, because it's easy to get shell shock and go, oh my God, I can't have a cybersecurity discussion. I don't even know what a router is. I don't, understand ingress and egress and, all that stuff. So yeah, I think we lose a lot, because of just having that fear of, getting into some of those conversations. Absolutely.
That's cool that you are, I think, and I've noticed that there is definitely more of a collaborative mindset when it comes to the trusted advisor community. Is that pretty recent? I mean, what was it like? What was the landscape like between, different trusted advisor companies back when you started versus today?
I think it's changing a lot and a lot more rapidly lately. I think that's really only been over the last couple of years. Telarus tried something similar a long time ago. I remember they used to have this thing in their back office where they would, if you were, say, a hardware reseller, that they would give you leads and, trying to make some collaborative effort between the guys that maybe dealt with hardware versus the guys that were dealing with cloud and software. And then, there was other guys in the industry that were talking about collaborative effort between MSPs and the agent community. The problem I always had there was most of the MSPs were dealing with smaller businesses that I didn't want to deal with. And we tried those kind of, collaborative efforts, but it got to a point where we had one MSP that we were dealing with, and they said, we just don't want to deal with telecom. It's not our forte. We don't want to touch it. But every time we went in to go, we got 5 locations we're doing fiber for their customer. At some point, I need your input because you are the IT guy. And, the more I kept hounding these guys, I'm like, no, I need you involved in it to an extent, because you need to tell me what IP address I need here or how many IPs I need on this network and so forth. And it got to be a point of contention where they just kind of shut down on us. The other part of that is that MSP wasn't sharing what we were giving them in the deal. They weren't sharing that with their sales reps. So the owners were keeping the money. And so now the sales rep had no incentive to bring us into the opportunity.
All right.
So the MSP angle, I just never saw. It didn't work well for us. But I think within the agent community, other advisors that do things well, and, ones that, can maybe fill gaps here and there. I think that's a better way to collaborate, than trying to, deal with guys that are, maybe handling, the MSP's work and the cybersecurity work or the break fix work and all that.
I think that's essentially what happens with these call them super agents or like mini TSDs. Like, I think that's where that comes from, is just the, collaborative nature of trusted advisors. They come together, and then the beauty of it is you bring the, call it the customer bases together. So now you have the multiple skills that you can apply, but to a broader sort of customer base. And, obviously we've seen a lot of other TSDs pop up in the last few years. So do you think that is what's causing the other TSDs to kind of pop up now? Or do you think it's, there are other things that the big TSDs aren't doing that's causing these smaller TSDs to pop up?
I think it's more of the latter, to be honest with you. So what I see, Zach, is, there's like AI is changing the landscape. I think there's going to be a lot of TSDs that are going to look at the tools. There are a couple already that are starting to, utilize some tools where, we could maybe send our client like an affiliate link. Hey, you don't need to buy your Microsoft licensing straight from Microsoft and sit on the phone for 2 hours waiting for a tier 1 guy to help you out. You can actually go in here, and this TSD, of course, we don't have to tell the client a TSD. They're never going to understand what a TSD is, but nevertheless, we say, get your licensing here and you get free tier 1 and tier 2 support. And that support is within, say, 8 minutes or whatever, instead of an hour on the phone, right?
Right.
That's a big win. And I think some TSDs are starting to see that. I think you're going to see some of those AI tools. I know of some companies out there that are trying to raise funding for creating these ecosystems where maybe a CTO can go in there and say, I need this, this, and this, and this, and here's my requirements, and let the AI spit out what company would be best for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to happen. And I think it's going to happen pretty soon.
Okay. What other, let's get into some trends here. So what are some of your, call it, bold predictions, or, just for the channel in the next couple of years, or maybe some trends that, in your eyes aren't getting enough attention or should be getting more attention?
I think one of the areas that a lot of agents aren't tapping into enough right now, and I think it's the next huge wave, is that desktop as a service, the cloud computing. I said it a couple of years ago, where I think there's going to come a day when you walk into Best Buy and you buy, literally, instead of buying a computer, you're buying literally a shell. And I'm not getting my CPU and my RAM and my applications from the cloud, but I'm also getting my bandwidth from the cloud. So I think there's going to come a day when you do that, and you're going to walk in and buy like a $200 shell of a computer, and all the resources come from the cloud. So I think agents need to understand this whole desktop as a service movement. If you've got, say, a call center client, you should be talking to them about DaaS, because how many agents do they have working from home right now, where you could offer them a DaaS solution? And it could even be just a Chromebook where I'm logging into a browser and getting access to a fully secure platform, and I'm not having to worry about what cable provider they're on at home, or what security they have on their, own laptop that they're using to answer calls with. And it takes care of a lot of that compliance with, PCI or HIPAA and things of that nature. So that's an area I think that's huge, that needs to be looked at. And a lot of agents probably are sitting on gold mines within their own base, that, they don't even realize, all the money that's sitting there.
Mm-hmm. I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, like, advisors want to feel like they are the expert. And I come from sales too. So when you're talking to somebody like a prospective customer, and you don't feel 100%, like maybe maybe you think, this might be a good prospect for DaaS, but like, I'm not really sure how, if the use case makes sense or what have you. I feel like it's a lot of the same with DaaS, unfortunately. And that's something that we try to talk about too, is like, here are all the use cases. And just like you said, like there are so many use cases that yes, there is a gold mine of prospective customers in their customer base. But, it just really kind of comes back to, a lot of folks just don't feel like they have the wherewithal to talk about it, because as an advisor, you're used to being sort of the smartest guy in the room or the smartest girl in the room.
Yep.
And, so how have you gotten past that? I mean, when you're talking to these prospective clients and you feel like this one solution could be a fit, but you don't know too much about it, like what's been your process for that?
So again, it kind of goes back to that messaging, right? And positioning ourselves correctly. But in the old days, I had a boss that used to tell me, Derek, make sure you're the smartest person in the room. So when I worked at Windstream and Paytech, I wanted to know everything about MPLS. I wanted to understand the network because I wanted to make sure if I have my network guy in the room and I'm in there, supporting the hardware, I wanted to make sure I was the smartest guy. Mm-hmm. That played to my detriment as I got into this industry, because the more you try to be the smartest guy in the room, the more the IT director just wants to get into a pissing match with you and
right,
and tell you, no, I know more about technology than you do. And so it took me literally a while to kind of figure out how to humble myself and say, how can I present this in a way that we don't have to be the smartest guy in the room? Mm-hmm. And that's where we started getting into understanding that at the end of the day, we're tech Sherpas, right? We're not experts in the technology. We're experts in the process. Mm-hmm. And then we're experts in the contract negotiations. We're weird in the way that we actually read contracts. We dig into them. Mm-hmm. And so we write clauses in our contracts for our clients that are going to shore up their SLA or make sure that term and termination is covered heavily. If this is a bad relationship, how do I get out of it? How do I pivot? And we've had those examples where we've had to take a client that, was in a bad contract. The company wanted $299,000 in ETFs, early termination fees. We negotiated that down to $40,000 and got another provider to come in and eat the $40,000 and give the client some rebates back on Polycom phones. They got 58 back in their pocket. So
not bad.
That's the kind of stuff that we want to focus on, right? Mm-hmm. If we can focus on being good at the procurement, the contract negotiation, and then the project management. So when we deliver a scope of work to a client, we're going to say, hey, this is what we see as the problems, and here's the solutions and the solution providers or the vendors that we feel are going to meet those needs, at least to like a 90% level. But if the client at that point wants to take our work and buy from their cousin at CDW or whatever, so be it. At least we're making a little bit of money on the front end, and then they can go wherever they want. But if they're truly trusting us, which the majority of the time they will, mm-hmm. they're going to, stay on board with us and go with one of our recommendations. Now, that's the value add that's where the value add really kicks in, is because if they go with what we're recommending, well, then we dig into their contract. Then we provide the project management to make sure that project stays on track, because it's not always just one vendor. It might be a network vendor and a cybersecurity vendor and a DaaS vendor, all involved in this one larger solution. And so we want to quarterback that. We want to help make sure that everything gets installed and that, time constraints are met, budgets are met, and all that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it's just it's all about the messaging. It's all about positioning ourselves correctly so that we don't have to say, yeah, we're experts in cybersecurity. No, I'm not an expert. But I'll, surround myself with really smart people, and I'll bring those guys to the table when needed.
What advice would you have for suppliers that are trying to earn a partnership with you, or any advisor for that matter?
That's a good question. Because, we get hit up probably, I don't know, I get at least 5 to 10 emails or phone calls from other solution providers, whether it's, a backup and a recovery solution that's brand new, or, some DevOps company that wants to, partner with us. I would say number one, just be honest. Let us know exactly where you feel you fit with your customers. I've had some vendors that say they do a lot of stuff and they don't really do it. So don't overpromise and underdeliver. And I tell every channel manager and every vendor that we ever work with, it's not baseball. I can't afford 3 strikes. If you, really screw up a client, then I'm probably just not going to work with you again. We have today, I think we're actually over 600 different solution providers that we could bring to the table. That's a lot. That covers, a good majority of the industry. And then we have some direct agreements with, a client maybe needed a certain solution, and so we went out and sought that solution. Or providers that we thought were just unique. But yeah, it is a good question. I don't have a really good answer for you, Zach, other than don't overpromise and underdeliver. They have to really know who they are and what they can, what gap they can fill for us.
Mm-hmm. Love it. We're coming up on time, so I always like to ask about advice that you might have. Obviously, I like the question about the suppliers because we are a supplier. But what about advice for, say, a younger Derek when you're first getting into the channel? Or, we talk about the potential of new trusted advisors coming up, the new generation, right? What advice do you have for either a younger you first getting into the channel, or like just any advisor?
Probably the first thing I would say is learn how to live on beans and rice for a year or two, because it's not easy. But the payoff is real. And the benefits of being in your own boss and, being able to create and really go your own way, there's so much freedom in it. It's an amazing thing to be able to do. Mm-hmm. But don't be scared. But I definitely would say have some cost savings, have some savings in the bank where you can, live lean for a good year or two, because we often think, I can go out tomorrow and I could sell this solution and then I can get it implemented and I can make $1,000 a month on that particular client. Well, it's not always that way. Sometimes you get caught up in legal, battles that go back and forth and, contract negotiations, and that sales cycle that you thought was going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks ends up being 3 or 4 months. And then it's 3 months to get it installed. And then I'm not paid until, after that. So I'm 6 months in, and then my TSD has to get paid. Then I get paid. So I'm a good 8 months out before I even see a paycheck on that.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you have to realize in this industry. So, a lot of guys will find partners that know the industry well and, maybe they have clients from, a previous role that they were in that they can bring over. And if you can do that, man, that's a great thing, but it's not always the case. So just, you're going to have to learn how to live lean, but the payoff is real.
I love it. Mr. Roush, thank you so much for coming on. I really had a good time. I hope we can do it again, because I feel like we could probably go on for another hour or two. So I'd love to catch up with you in maybe a couple months and do another one, if you'll have me, of course. But no, I really do appreciate it. And I think you've brought the listeners a lot of value today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I appreciate you letting me come on.
Yeah, and tell everybody like how they can find you, and also like tell us what you've got coming next. What's next for Vocal Point?
Yeah, so vocalpointconsulting.com is the website. You can always find me on LinkedIn. It's one of the few social medias that I'm on. I'm not an Instagram guy. I'm not a Facebook guy. So I'm a little bit leery about cybersecurity and all. So I'm not on a lot of that stuff. But nevertheless, you can find me on LinkedIn. Hit us up on our website, or look us up on Cloud Sherpa. Cloud Sherpa is the tagline for our YouTube channel.
Excellent. All right, everybody. That's it for today. Thank you so much for coming by. And Derek, we'll do it again soon. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.